In a world like Thedas, where the line between life and death is as thin as a blade's edge, it's not unusual for someone to wake up each day wondering if it will be their last. Life here is fragile. Darkspawn lurk beneath the earth, treachery is woven into the very fabric of society, and even the simplest illness can spiral into something far worse. To live to old age in such a world is no small feat. It's an accomplishment, almost a miracle. But for those who do make it, who live long enough to look back at the chaos they've survived, they start to wonder, is it enough? It's a strange luxury to have time. Time to reflect, to question whether the battles fought, the risks taken, and the lives lost have been worth it. But there's something about reaching that age, that stage of life, where you begin to sense the weight of all you've done, and perhaps even the weight of the things left undone. And then there are those who have made peace with it. Those who, despite the relentless march of time, have found a way to live with the reality of their mortality. They are the ones who have learned, perhaps the hard way, that time is a finite resource, and they have decided to make what's left of it matter in their own way. The problem, though, is that the reality of mortality is often at odds with the ideals of youth, of ambition, of hope, of believing that there's always more time. Today we're diving into two characters who both wrestle with the idea of mortality, but who approach it in very different ways. On one hand, we have Wynne, a mage who's faced death countless times and has come to terms with it. And on the other hand, we have Emmrich, a necromancer whose fear of death drives him to make dangerous choices. Let's break down why, in terms of writing, Wynne stands tall while Emmerich, well, not so much. Let's begin with mortality. For many of us, the concept of death is both inevitable and terrifying, but how we respond to that fear can shape us as individuals. Wynne's arc centers on the acceptance of death, which in turn drives her to make selfless decisions that impact everyone around her. Her death is meaningful because she lived fully and gave everything she had for the greater good, making her one of the most poignant characters in the series. Wynne, a seasoned mage, embodies what it means to live fully despite the inevitability of death. She has lived long enough to see the high and lows of Thedas, friends and allies lost, entire civilizations scrambled under the weight of chaos, and yet she remains steadfast. Unlike so many who fear the final curtain, Wynne doesn't run from death. To her, it's not an enemy to be defeated but a natural part of the journey. Her approach to life is one of quiet wisdom. Wynne recognizes the fleeting nature of time, but instead of letting it paralyze her, she chooses to act with purpose. It's not about how long she has left, it's about what she can accomplish with the time she has. Her years of experience have taught her that survival alone isn't enough. Life, for Wynne, is about leaving a mark, not through power or glory, but through meaningful contributions. She doesn't fear the end because she understands the big picture. Wynne has reached a point where she sees her own mortality not as a shadow looming over her, but as a reminder to cherish what remains. It's this perspective that makes her character so compelling. She reminds us that while youth and strength may fade, wisdom and purpose are timeless. Wynne has lived a life shaped by chaos and survival, and she's seen it all. Friends, allies, and enemies brought low by the relentless weight of Thedas. She's faced unimaginable odds, watched people falter under the weight of their choices, and yet she's emerged from it all with a quiet resilience. Wynne's experiences, as harrowing as they have been, have not hardened her. Instead, they have shaped her into someone who sees survival not as the absence of death, but as the presence of wisdom, adaptability, and purpose. To Wynne, death has never been an enemy to conquer. It's simply a part of life's inevitable rhythm. It's a shadow that looms but never overpowers. Her journey isn't driven by a desperate bid to extend her life, but by her understanding that the moments she has left hold more value than the years she has already lived. Each step she takes, each decision she makes, is an acknowledgement of the finite nature of her existence, and a reminder of what it means to truly live. For Wynne, death was never something to fear. She treated it as an old friend waiting at the end of the road, a companion she would one day rejoin. Mortality didn't scare her or stop her from doing what she believed was right. Even after a spirit of faith anchored her to life, postponing her inevitable end, Wynne didn't let it change her. To her, the spirit's presence was no guarantee. It could leave her at any moment. And yet, she carried on as she always had, living as though each day might be her last. The spirit might have kept her tethered to life, but Wynne never let it tether her choices. When the end finally came, it wasn't with regret, but with a quiet acceptance, as if she always had been prepared to meet it. Wynne's story is one of quiet resilience and unwavering purpose. She lived with the constant understanding that her path would end on the road, fighting for a better world for those she cared about. She was never destined to die peacefully of old age, confined to a bed, surrounded by loved ones. As a mage, she knew an ordinary life was never an option, and as a heir of the Blight, she accepted that her death would come in battle. In the end, Wynne made the ultimate sacrifice for her only living family, her strange son, Rhys. When Rhys's lover, the Templar Evangeline, lay dying, Wynne transferred the spirit of faith that had sustained her for over a decade into Evangeline, saving her life. It was a poetic end, mirroring the reckless passion of Wynne's youth and her brief affair with the Templar who fathered Rhys. By giving her life, Wynne ensured her son's happiness and the future they both longed for but never thought possible. Where Wynne's story is defined by resilience and a quiet acceptance of mortality, Emmerich's is dominated by a consuming fear of death, a fear that shapes his every action and ultimately his downfall. As a member of the Nevarran Mournwatch, Emmerich was meant to embody their ethos, respecting death as an inevitable part of the natural order, safeguarding the living from those who would exploit the veil between life and death. But for Emmerich, that respect is little more than a facade. Beneath his scholarly demeanor lies a man terrified of his own mortality. This fear drives him to defy the very principles he swore to uphold. In his desperation to cheat death, Emmerich's choices grow darker, more selfish. He begins experimenting with forbidden necromancy, pushing the boundaries of what even the Mournwatch would consider sacrilege. Most damning of all, he's willing to sacrifice Manfred, the spirit who has served him faithfully for years, to achieve his ultimate goal, immortality as a lich. This tragic spiral starkly contrasts with Wynne's autonomy. Wynne's journey was shaped by her own decisions, her relationship with the spirit of faith remaining firmly in her control. Her story wasn't one the player could rewrite or manipulate, it was hers alone. Emmerich, however, is denied even that dignity. In Velgar, the player character Rook is given the power to make the ultimate decision for Emmerich, whether he sacrifices Manfred to become immortal or forsakes his dark ambitions. Years of Emmerich's character development, the slow unraveling of his fear, the gradual erosion of his values, are rendered meaningless in the face of a single choice made by someone else. This lack of agency turns Emmerich from a man with a tragic but compelling arc into a puppet of the player's will. It undermines the thematic weight of his story, reducing his complex relationship with mortality to a binary decision that robs him of the very thing he sought to reclaim: control over his own fate. From a writer's perspective, Emmerich's story is ripe with potential. A necromancer terrified of death, sworn to protect the natural order of life and its inevitable end, but ultimately willing to violate those tenets for self-preservation. This is fertile ground for exploring the nature of fear, hypocrisy, and the cost of ambition. The framework is there. Emmerich is a man haunted not by ghosts but by the luminous specter of his own mortality, and his descent into darker pursuits creates a stark moral conflict. But Velgar fumbles that potential by depriving Emmerich of his own voice at the most critical moment in his arc. For a story about fear and control, the irony is almost painful. Emmerich spends years trying to wrest power from death itself, only to have his fate decided for him by someone else. When Rook, the player character, chooses whether Emmerich sacrifices Manfred to become a lich or abandons his quest for immortality, it's not just a choice. It's a culmination of his narrative. Or at least it should be. But by handing that choice to the player, the game undercuts the very essence of his story. It strips him of the agency needed to complete his arc in a meaningful way. This is where Wynne's narrative succeeds, where Emmerich's fails. Wynne is defined by her autonomy. Her choices, whether to join the Warden, to serve the spirit of faith, or to sacrifice herself for her son, are all deeply personal. They are hers alone, and the player is a bystander to her journey. By keeping her story out of the player's hands, the writers preserved its integrity and allowed Wynne's character to shine as someone who lived and died on her own terms. Emmerich, on the other hand, becomes a narrative casualty to the player-centric design philosophy. His story is shaped by years of fear, guilt, and self-delusion, yet it culminates in a moment where his agency is entirely removed. Instead of reckoning with his choices and facing their consequences, Emmerich's fate hinges on what Rook decides. From a storytelling standpoint, this is deeply unsatisfying. The beauty of a tragic arc lies in the character's ability or inability to confront their flaws and make a decision that reflects their growth or lack thereof. When the player takes that moment away, it reduces Emmerich to a set piece, a tragic figure whose story is told about him rather than through him. Moreover, this approach dilutes the thematic power of his arc. Emmerich's fear of death is compelling because it's universal. We can all understand the terror of the unknown, the desperation to hold on to life at any cost. But when his story becomes a matter of player choice, it stops being a reflection of his internal struggles and instead becomes a commentary on the player's moral compass. The focus shifts from Emmerich's journey to Rook's values, which are at best tangential to his arc. For writers, this is a cautionary tale about balancing player agency with character integrity. While interactive storytelling thrives on player choice, not every narrative moment should be handed to the player. Emmerich's decision to sacrifice Manfred or to let go of his ambitions should have been his alone. Imagine the narrative weight of watching Emmerich wrestle with his fear, his loyalty to Manfred, and his yearning for immortality, ultimately coming to a decision that feels earned. By sidelining him in his own story, Velgar misses an opportunity to deliver a truly resonant arc. Emmerich could have been a tragic mirror to Wynne, a character who, unlike her, couldn't find peace with death and was undone by his refusal to let go. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into Dragon Age and want to see more content like this, consider supporting the channel by joining my Patreon. Your support helps keep the content flowing and allows me to keep bringing you more in-depth analysis, lore breakdowns, and character explorations. Plus, you'll get access to exclusive content, glimpses of what goes behind the scenes, and the chance to be a part of a growing community of fellow lore fans. So head on over to Patreon and become a supporter today. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay critical, stay curious, and stay gaming.